please drop it into the comments and I'll get to it. Again, I'm Alex Beatty, divorce prep coach, otherwise known as the Divorce Planner, here on Instagram and across all social media platforms. I specialize in working with people in advance of a separation or a divorce, so they really transition this time in life emotionally, financially, as prepared as possible. I love these mini masterclass conversations I have with different divorce professionals. Today's guest, Joanna, just Nisioti?
That's very good. People call me Joe.
Okay.
I'm known as Joe. Um, but the verified on Instagram doesn't allow me to, my passport's Joanna, so
Okay.
I have to
Okay.
go by that. But
Okay.
people call me
So,
Joe.
but
Nisioti. Yeah.
I feel like I stumble over your last name because my instinct is to say it in a very Italian
Yeah.
way.
It's actually Greek originally, but it sounds Italian and English. So Nisioti. I mean, I've heard it all. So
Well, my guest today is an expert in all things breakup and divorce recovery. And so, with that, I'm just going to kind of dive into the first question. Look, as I said, it feels like divorce or a breakup, a big breakup, is really an opportunity to kind of go into some deep introspection. But during divorce, so many people feel like they've lost a real sense of themselves somewhere along the process. So, what's your approach to really helping someone rediscovering who they are, beyond their marriage and beyond their divorce?
well, I think that's a question we all struggle with, and divorce just really brings it to the
Mhm.
forefront. Um, I always invite clients to stay very curious about themselves, to not take who they think they are for granted in a way. Like it's like almost autopilot. Start getting really curious about spend time with yourself, right? Don't get so busy distracting, which is almost it's a natural thing that we want to do, right? To take us away from the pain or the grief, the sadness, or the overwhelm. But it's that introspection, right, that will bring you closer to yourself, and just getting really curious, getting really accustomed to listening to those whispers that are always there, that are trying to remind you what you're about, what you really want for your life, um, what you don't want.
Yeah.
Um, and spend time. I mean, I know it sounds very cliche, but I believe in it so much. Spend time in nature, spend time outdoors.
Mhm.
Um, Journaling is another cliche, but it works, right? It really works.
Mhm.
And it's just really staying curious and not being too quick on deciding what your life's going to look like now. Don't believe the stories in your head. Don't believe the stories you're hearing. Don't feel everything,
Mhm.
but watch for the stories that you attach to those feelings.
I mean, 100, I'm like nodding my head like it's going to pop off my neck. There's so many wonderful things I just kind of want to go through that you said. I think the headline being, be curious, right? So sometimes
Absolutely.
you're coming out of a long-term relationship, you've kind of numbed out a little bit, right? Like as we started talking about, you're disconnected from really your sense of self. Or maybe if this caught you off guard, it just makes you feel as if you question everything about where you are and what you want. So I love that your headline is be curious. Let go of any kind of expectation of who you're supposed to be along this journey as well. And I think that the tips that you provided, especially listen to those whispers. We all have, we never hit a brick wall of like, this is what you're supposed to do, this is who you're supposed to be, but you do get those little things inside of your head that say, hey, have that conversation, or go to that thing,
Hmm.
or something lights up in you. So being able to pay attention to that, I think you're 100% right. Just give yourself some time for stillness so that you can hear that voice
Oh,
too. Um,
absolutely.
so let's kind of dive into something that I think a lot of women have issues with, especially when they're, kind of not feeling grounded and centered in who they are. And that's really boundaries, and that can be a challenge, especially with a difficult soon to be or ex, already an ex. What strategies have you found work with clients for really setting and keeping healthy limits during a divorce or a breakup?
I think all recovering people pleasers struggle with this one. right? And they get kind of, well, I put myself in there, get kind of caught up in the trying to keep the peace, right?
Mhm.
Trying to do the right thing. And they forget about their inner peace, what's right by them,
Mhm.
and it kind of gets really confusing, right? And what happens is they start overextending. We start overextending. We self abandon, right? And keep moving away from ourselves over and over.
Mhm.
And boundaries are really important that you set in communications, in your interactions. But what I always emphasize the most is the boundaries that you set for yourself.
Yeah.
No one talks about this enough, but we need to have boundaries for ourselves that keep us from overextending. We have a clear line for ourselves that we don't cross, because once we cross and we go beyond that, that's when we are walking away from ourselves. That's when we're betraying ourselves, when we're abandoning ourselves. So it's really important to be really clear, and again, to listen to yourself, to stay really close to your truth. We all know what those boundaries
Yeah.
are. We've got an internal compass, we've got an internal like gauge that tells us, our body tells us, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes we second guess ourselves because, again, we're people pleasers. We've been raised or taught to be that way in
Mhm.
many, many ways. Watch for the shoulds. I should do this. I should do that. That whole judgment, right? Are you judging yourself? Are you shaming yourself in the process? Are you guilt tripping yourself, right? Whose voices are you hearing when you're making those decisions?
Uh,
And when you're second guessing yourself, your body usually tells you. So
that's a,
it's that whole mind body connection and becoming really aware of yourself.
yeah. So true. And I really love, you bringing up the body, that, things won't sit well with your gut, or you'll get that feeling of like, or I'm walking on eggshells and I don't want to be here. It doesn't feel good. But, I love that you said, setting boundaries is really about you. It's really about respecting what you want and protecting yourself and advocating for yourself. And, something as simple as just saying no, which I know we all hear is a complete
Mhm.
sentence, but sometimes you have to get used to saying that. And to, as you said, that narrative in your head can really try and trip you up. And I want us to talk about that narrative in a second, but if you flip the what it means to say no into saying no means saying yes to me, it starts to reframe your thinking around creating those boundaries, and also understanding that you don't have to explain what works for you and what doesn't work for you to anybody else. And when you're coming out of a long-term relationship, setting those new boundaries feels really uncomfortable. you
Absolutely.
know
Absolutely. And I think that's the trap, that it feels so uncomfortable that we automatically assume it's wrong or that we're doing something wrong. And that's where we need to self-regulate, right? Learn how to self-regulate and understand that this process is going to make you uncomfortable because that's how you expand, right? That's how you evolve. It's going to stretch you because you're trying to break those patterns.
Yeah, and you know, just picking up on you saying the word stretch you, the thing about when you're kind of coming out of a long-term relationship and you're feeling powerless, and maybe you don't have that core sense of self in the moment, trying to give yourself as much grace and kindness when you're speaking to yourself, knowing that there's a learning curve. There's no perfect way to start to implement boundaries, or, kind of to discover yourself that is
Mhm.
seamless. And we're all human. And you can have a step backwards, and also just a micro step in a direction, like you said, of like, hey, I'm going to schedule time that's just for me. I'm going to block out that time on my calendar, which is what I work with clients on all the time. For, I'm going to take that 10-minute walk today, or
Mhm.
I'm going to set aside 5 minutes. Like, prioritize yourself in your
Exactly.
schedule,
Exactly.
even in that physical way of putting it on your calendar, and what other kind of like tools can people, can women use really, aside from getting into nature, scheduling that time for themselves, being able to start to implement some boundaries? Are there some other questions they should be asking themselves during this time to help, with that introspection?
Oh, there's always questions. There's always
That was a trick
so
question. I
many
knew there was a
questions.
lot of answers.
Clearly, I know. Um, there's
You,
always a lot of questions, and I don't even know where to start with that. And that's why I always say stay curious. Um, why isn't a good enough question, right? I always say switch it to I wonder why, right? Why am I this way? Is judgmental in many ways, right? I wonder why is a much more compassionate way, right? I wonder why. I wonder what. I wonder what I'd like to do next. I wonder what I'd like my life to look like. Start getting really comfortable with asking yourself what you want and stop playing small,
yeah.
because we go into excuses or we go into, oh, that doesn't make sense, or that's overly ambitious, or as if I could ever do that, or you're asking for too much, or all kinds of things. We all have an inner dialogue, and I've spoken to hundreds and hundreds, and I've worked with so many people, and the parallels are incredible in so many stories. We all have obviously our very individual stories, but in terms of the themes, they're very similar in how we talk to ourselves, the stories that we've heard, the stories we tell ourselves. We don't even realize we're doing it. So start getting really comfortable with the truths that you're going to uncover, and understand that they're there for you to honor them, not for you to keep shutting them down.
Oh, I think that's incredibly powerful. And just, especially building on what you said about playing small. When you've been in a long-term relationship that hasn't been that great for a long time, you tend to numb out. It feels like a limbo. And so, playing small or being invisible just are par for the course. And,
Mhm.
the headline here is we get one go round. This is you are the lead character in the movie.
Absolutely.
You're the lead character in the movie. And so, I personally approached this transition of a separation and divorce from myself as how do I step into living the life I really want to be
Mhm.
living moving forward and driving that. And so like this, the mantra became, this half of my life is called saying yes.
Yeah.
This half of my, right.
To
This
you,
is
to you.
to you and to new experiences.
Opportunities. Yeah.
Yeah, new, and you just never know, which goes back to what you're talking about staying curious. You have to be open, let yourself have bigger experiences. The fact that, I agree with you. I talk to clients, their stories are very similar, as was my story, right? When I
Mhm.
was coming out of, my divorce, of that narrative you say in your head. And it's really important to remember that you are not your brain. Your brain is actually a tool, an organ for you to use. You
Yes.
need to learn how to be able to challenge what it says, because you and I've talked about this before. There's a negative cognitive,
Mhm.
bias that everybody experiences, and recognizing that as not, the truth, and challenging it when it
Yeah.
comes up.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because
Absolutely.
this process also ends up triggering a lot of things from your past, whether you had, unhealed trauma from a parental
Hmm.
relationship or a previous relationship. You know, ending a relationship, is an opportunity to maybe face some unhealed past wounds, and to take accountability for your part in it. And I don't mean that in a way of like, oh, you're responsible. It's just like when you own that this is a pattern, when you allow yourself to see a little bit deeper of what's behind, why did I make these choices? Why did, and approaching that with kindness, you know?
Yes. Compassion, self compassion, which is the antidote to shame,
Yeah.
right? So, so
Mm-hmm.
important. And if you don't do that introspective work, same patterns are going to keep repeating. right? Some lessons are going to keep coming into your life in different ways and through different faces and different people. Um, so as hard as it is, and I always say, divorce just chews you up and spits you out, right? In many, many ways.
Yeah.
But it also wakes you up. It really wakes you up.
Yeah.
And it's meant to.
Mhm.
It's meant to,
Mhm.
right? Because we are all here we're meant to live really fulfilling,
Mhm.
beautiful, joyous lives. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean there won't be challenges, because there's no life without challenges, right? That's part of the human experience.
Mhm.
But in terms of a fulfilling life that's true to yourself,
Mhm.
is absolutely your birthright.
Yeah. It's absolutely true. I will say with my own journey and my own reading and educating myself on different philosophies and techniques, that I apply to my coaching, but also to my real life. I think the biggest one is, what you said, which is we are all deserving. The point of being here is joy and connection. And so
Mm,
anything that gets in the way of you being able to experience that, you really have to examine why and remove it from your life. It doesn't
yes.
mean that hardship doesn't happen. It absolutely does. But you need to have a balance. And you also need to have that intention of, where we started this conversation of this is a time for introspection. This is a time to be curious about what do I want more of in my life? What brings me joy? What do I want less of? And being able to thoughtfully and mindfully with intention have those be your north star as you're making this transition. I've talked to you about this. The basis of my practice is all there's an emotional side to divorce and there's a business side, and you need to separate to
Absolutely.
address them both, but they need to be separated. And we're often making these huge legal decisions and financial decisions while processing really big emotions. And I think people are really surprised. I have a lot of my clients who are like, I've been wanting this for so long, and then they're kind of knocked on their ass when they're like, I'm feeling super sad, I'm feeling scared, I'm feeling also elated. And so
Mhm.
it's like there's an emotional roller coaster.
Yes,
How do you
absolutely.
guide clients to balance their emotional well-being, while they have to make these critical choices for their new chapter and navigating the divorce process?
I think it's really important I notice that a lot of people are afraid of
Mm,
their emotions and they avoid their emotions. And that's where it becomes problematic.
mm,
Your emotions aren't problems.
mm,
Your emotions are all valid,
mm,
and you need to be able to feel them all. We're afraid to feel our
yeah.
anger. We're afraid to feel our sadness. We weren't helped maybe to know how to process these
Mm,
in the past, but learning how to do that is available to you, and it's only going to help
mm,
you. So it becomes really difficult to navigate when you don't know how to do that, or when you don't allow yourself to do that.
mm,
They're very powerful, all those emotions. And not only is it healthy, right? To stop and try to just express them, to know how to process them, to know how to honor them, but they're also going to guide you. They're also there to guide you.
mm,
Um, and they're very important in the decisions you make. You
mm,
can't always separate them. I
mm,
don't believe you can always separate the two processes, but learning what's what and what's coming up for you and why can absolutely guide you as well.
Yeah, you just nailed it. I think that, what I talk to clients about is when those big emotions come up, as you said, you need to acknowledge them. When you don't give them the space to like, I recognize this is how I'm feeling right now, and instead you push it down and ignore it, you're just doubling down on that, biting you in the ass later. It's
Mhm.
going to rear its ugly head in another way because it's going to demand to be seen. And the other part of that is when that emotion arises, give it space, ride it like a wave. You know
Yes.
what I mean? As opposed to, being dragged under by it or just burying it in the sand. Right. It normally, scientifically, it's shown that it's usually just a few minutes of letting it wash over you
Yeah.
and pass. So honor that process with the emotion. And then also, there's an opportunity to dig down a little bit. What's underneath this emotion?
Yes.
You know, and that Go ahead, please.
Sorry, I didn't mean to, no, I was going to say exactly what you were
Mhm.
saying, that scientifically we know it takes about 90 seconds for an emotion to move through your body,
Yeah.
right? If you allow it. If it takes longer than that, it's not because the process taking
Mhm.
longer, it's because you are ruminating on the emotion.
Mhm.
And it usually has to do with the stories you're telling, you know, the meaning that you attach to that, the
Mhm.
stories that you attach to that. So that's again where we get stuck,
Mhm.
really stuck.
Mhm. Yeah, I just, again, my head's going to fall off my neck. I keep nodding. It's just that going through this in a mindful way with compassion for yourself by making sure that you're paying attention to what's coming up for you. And for me, it's like, yes, big emotions are going to come up. Those big emotions should not be driving legal or financial decisions at all. That's separate work. And a lot of people when they're going through a breakup or a divorce, it's like rage, sadness, all grief, all these things can underline stem from fear. And when we address that head on and we remind ourselves by whatever work we're doing that, hey, I got this, I got you, just it builds a trust in yourself for yourself that you're going to have in the bank moving forward. And that's really a beautiful thing. But this is a part of the process, I think, is the headline of what you and I are talking about today. That, by acknowledging and being present and doing this work, this is lifelong work. This is just
Mhm.
about, getting the instructions for the
Exactly.
human man, how to be a human.
Absolutely.
You know,
Absolutely. It will help you and come up again. Once you learn how to do it through this process,
yeah.
because really, you know, you're almost forced to, right? If you're going to move
Yeah.
on, um, then you know that's with you for
Mhm.
life, right? You can build, learn to ground yourself in such deep self-trust
Mhm.
that you've always got your back. The thing is, we don't realize that we've always had our backs, that we've always, we are the ones that ensure that we always
Yeah.
make it through,
Mhm.
whatever happens, right? You might have a support system,
Mhm.
or people around you that help, absolutely.
Mhm.
But it's always you that gets you through at the end of the day. And that never leaves you. But imagine once it becomes conscious, then you don't get lost in that overwhelm all of the time. And the the working relationship you've got with yourself changes entirely.
Mhm.
Entirely.
I think that's such a beautiful way to actually to wrap up this really important conversation, which is you have always had your back and you will always have your back. And I love that saying, if you have survived 100% of your hardest days, you have.
Absolutely.
So it's like, trust yourself. And this is a time for deep introspection, to be curious, be aware of those big feelings that come up, to relearn to trust yourself and to step into that, no longer playing small and really being able to create healthy boundaries for yourself and just embracing this work as this is a continuation and it's an investment of love.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. It,
And you know what, Alex? I think people also need to remember that it's going to get messy. You're
yeah.
going to make mistakes. I don't think ever anything's ever like we learn from everything, right? It's
Mhm.
all a process.
Yes.
But it's a messy, life
Mhm.
is messy. We are messy as humans. So don't expect yourself to get it perfect.
Mhm.
You're always getting it perfect in a special way
Mhm.
because of your own journey and what you're meant to learn in your own
Mhm.
journey.
Mhm.
And you have to be open to things not always turning out the way you thought you would, but once you learn the process of,
Mhm.
okay, what was I meant to learn?
Mhm.
How can I use this to my advantage
Mhm.
moving forward? What would I do differently? Then you're in a completely different
Yeah,
game.
it's true.
So don't just, get really comfortable in the
Yeah.
messy. Get really comfortable in not knowing. Get really comfortable in feeling confused and
Mhm.
lost
Mhm.
and sitting with that.
Mhm.
Those are the most important times in a
Yeah,
way. The most challenging, but also the ones that really lead to those
it's
upgrades.
so true. Get comfortable with the messy. I think that there's this instinct that something's wrong. I've done something wrong, or I'm not on the right track because it's messy. Look, if there's one thing I can tell you for certain, life is about navigating problems, right? And you know, people lose jobs, people get sick, and sometimes relationships end. It's about how you handle those.
Mhm.
That's continuing to build character. That's continuing your own self growth and being able to handle those things with self-compassion by accepting and letting go of an expectation of what things are supposed to look like.
Mhm.
I agree, is those are some of the most valuable kind of gifts you can give yourself during this time. Joe, thank
Absolutely.
you so much for this
Oh, thanks
beautiful
for having me.
conversation.
Absolutely.
I love your philosophy. You know, for anybody who might have joined us late, I'm going to be linking Joe in this conversation, which is going to post immediately after, as well as her account. She's here on Instagram at the underscore comeback underscore coach. And if you're not familiar with her, which would be a jaw dropper because she's like a little powerhouse on here, please go check out her account.
Thank you.
What you speak on really resonates. And I thank you deeply for having this conversation with me
Thanks
today.
for having
Yeah,
me. It's been an honor. Thank you.
thank
Thank
you.
you.
And thanks
Speak
to
to you
everybody who
soon.
joined us. See you soon.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.